Over the last few days, thousands of migrants in Belarus have been amassing at the Polish border, actively encouraged by Belarusian authorities. In response, Poland has deployed some 12,000 troops to prevent a surge at their border, and shots have even been fired between Polish and Belarusian security forces. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how we got here, what might happen next, and why this is a new low for Belarusian President Lukashenko. So to understand this story, you have to go back to the Belarusian presidential elections in August 2020. Incumbent President Alexander Lukashenko was running for a sixth term in office, having been in power since 1994. Over his reign, Lukashenko has become ever more authoritarian, and every election since 1994 has been considered by international monitors to neither be free nor fair. And this one was no different, with official results claiming that Lukashenko had implausibly won a massive 80% of the total vote, while the main opposition candidate had won just 10%. As well as that, the election was marred with reports of state-sponsored violence and election fraud. The results of this election led to widespread protests across Belarus and a violent crackdown by security forces, including the detainment of some 7,000 Belarusians. In response, many countries, including the EU, refused to recognise the election results, with some, including the EU, UK, US, Canada and Switzerland, imposing sanctions on Belarus. EU sanctions have steadily expanded since then, especially after Belarusian authorities forced a Ryanair flight to land in Minsk in order to detain a Belarusian dissident. Belarus's response to these sanctions has been quite extreme. They've flown thousands of mostly Iraqi Kurdish migrants from the Middle East into Minsk and then sent them to Latvia, Lithuania and Poland, the three EU countries that border Belarus, in order to manufacture a migrant crisis and hopefully blackmail the EU into either dropping the sanctions or even paying Belarus to stop. Yep, you heard that right. Lukashenko has essentially been using people as a sort of political weapon, literally flying them over to Minsk just to send them directly to the rest of Europe. And while Lukashenko denies doing this, there's some pretty concrete evidence, because some of the migrants have been flown over using Belarus's national airline, Belarus. And more than ever, with around 40 flights a week arriving in Minsk from Istanbul, Damascus and Dubai, up from 17 a week this time in 2019. And videos have also surfaced of Belarusian security forces actively escorting migrants to the border. There have even been reports of Belarusian forces beating migrants if they try and stay in the country, and firing shots to scare them into Poland. Furthermore, according to the Latvian foreign minister, Belarusian and Russian agents have been using migrant flows to sneak into the EU. This is fairly worrying, because Russian agents have a history of being pretty active in Europe. There was the killing of Alexander Litvinenko in London in 2016, the attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury in 2018, and the shooting and death of Zelinkam Kangoshvili in Berlin in 2019. And Belarusian secret services have apparently taken a leaf out of the Russian playbook as well, because in August this year, the badly beaten body of a Belarusian dissident who founded an organisation to assist other persecuted Belarusian exiles was discovered hanged in a park in Kiev. In response to these new migrant influxes, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland have all deployed troops to their borders and started putting up barbed wire fences, with Poland announcing a state of emergency in early September. Furthermore, Germany has announced an investigation into the, quote, organisers of the current protests, which is a thinly veiled reference to Lukashenko. And the EU have even flirted with extending sanctions to cover Belarus. Anyway, things have really stepped up in recent months, with Poland reporting 17,000 illegal migrant crossings in October alone. For context, there were just 1,000 in the first months of the year, and 8,000 in the 2 months preceding October. And a large fraction of these migrants are carrying on to Germany, which has received some 6,000 migrants via Poland in the last few months, having received just 26 in the first 6 months of this year. And since Poland has started refusing migrants entry and putting up barbed wire fences at the border, some 4,000 migrants have amassed on the other side of the border, according to official estimates. And in response, Poland has deployed some 12,000 troops to counteract them. So it seems that the stage is set for a serious confrontation, and there have even been reports of shots being fired between Polish and Belarusian authorities. But what happens next? Well, hopefully the two sides can agree on some sort of de-escalation, but this is looking unlikely. The crisis has been going on for months, and Lukashenko has shown no sign of stopping, presumably in part because the EU did actually pay Turkey €6 billion to stem the migrant crisis back in 2016, while the EU continued to expand sanctions. Equally, despite criticism from the EU and Amnesty International, Poland's government have refused to de-escalate themselves, committing more troops to the border and stepping up efforts to push back migrants into Belarus. All of this is just to say that de-escalation looks unlikely at the moment, which is bad news for, well, everyone. Zooming out a bit, the wider geopolitical consequence of this dispute is that it will push Lukashenko's Belarus ever closer to Putin's Russia and away from the EU. Putin is basically Lukashenko's only ally at this point, and Belarus is economically reliant on Russia, especially post-EU sanctions. Unsurprisingly then, Russia has already defended Belarus's actions, with a Kremlin spokesman insisting that we have no doubt here that the Belarusian migration services are taking all necessary measures to keep the situation in the legal field. And the Russian foreign minister has even suggested on Tuesday that the EU should pay Belarus to stop them from sending migrants into Europe. The consensus is then that Putin is at least supporting Lukashenko in his efforts, if not actively orchestrating them himself. And on Wednesday, Poland's Prime Minister described Vladimir Putin as the mastermind behind the crisis. As a final thing, it's worth remembering that the people who suffer most from this are the migrants themselves. At least 5 migrants have already died trying to get out of Belarus, and that number will definitely rise if no resolution is agreed soon, either in the ensuing violence between Polish and Belarusian security forces, or later in the year when the Baltic winter really kicks in. We're not saying that Poland should just take in all of the migrants necessarily. That's probably not a good long-term strategy, because it will just encourage Lukashenko to continue flying migrants over. But it is worth remembering that the pawns in this are all people, which is what makes Lukashenko's game so morally reprehensible. What do you think though? And what do you expect to happen next? Be sure to comment your thoughts in the comments below. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video and release updates on this topic. Also, a special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description.